Hey there, guys. So I want to thank you, as always, for taking the time to check out this week's live stream, where we're going to be going over a pretty unique topic. And this is not really something I've discussed, even though I say that usually every time. There are some topics where I do go over pretty often. But with this topic, this is not something I've really touched on that much. So I think that you'll find this helpful and valuable. So what we're going to be talking about today, of course, is metabolic flexibility and how you can boost fat loss and energy. So before I do get started, of course, my website is bponlinefitness.com. The address is here on screen. Definitely check that out for a free fitness newsletter when you sign up to the email list on my homepage at the very bottom of the page. You can also check out my blog as well as a ton of other information, as well as information such as learning about online fitness coaching. So, with that being said, guys, let's talk about this topic, which is, of course, metabolic flexibility. So, when we're getting started with this, I do want to sort of go over a few sort of points to sort of understand this topic before we dive deeper into what we're going to be talking about. So, the first point we need to do is, of course, define what is metabolic flexibility. So, this is basically the body's ability to efficiently switch between burning carbohydrates and fats for energy depending on the activity level, intensity, as well as the fuel availability. So, why does this matter in particular? So, this helps to support efficient energy in the body and helping to use that more during workouts as well as at rest. So, this also helps to enhance fat burning during low intensity activity or fasting. This also can help improve carbohydrate utilization during high intensity training, as well as aiding in blood sugar regulation and insulin sensitivity. This also can help to boost overall metabolic health and performance. Metabolic health, of course, being helping to aid in muscle gain as well as to be able to help you perform better in your workouts at the same time. So, when we're talking about this topic, there's a few different points that I want to expand upon when you understand how your body uses these components when it comes to metabolic flexibility. So, how exactly does your body choose fuel, whether it be carbs versus fat? So, your body uses, of course, two main fuel sources. And when we're talking about this, you're going to notice that you've likely seen these. If you've watched any of my previous live streams, I've talked about carbs and fats as well as protein often. And as we know, carbs and fats are known, of course, as a macronutrient. So the reason, and one thing I've mentioned too in previous streams about carbs, because carbs are usually sort of seen as the bad guy when they're not necessarily the bad guy, they are an energy source. So if you see somebody who has, maybe a lower carb diet, they're likely going to be having lower energy, throughout the day. So it's important to make sure that you include, these nutrients in your diet regardless, because when you include these nutrients, they help to, of course, aid in that energy and also in the recovery process, much like in the same way protein does. For example, before I sort of expand on what we're talking about here, with carbs, of course, they're more beneficial when you do consume them pre-workout before your workouts. However, they can still be beneficial post-workout to help aid in the muscle repair process. With fats, of course, healthy fats, fatty acids, omega 3s, when you have like foods like avocado, olive oil, and things of that nature, that's going to actually help with more hormone regulation such as testosterone and things of that nature. So these two nutrients play a big role, of course, not in only how your body chooses that fuel, but also in other functions in the body. So I did want to sort of preface that here before I expanded on this. So back at this topic at hand, so your body uses, of course, two main fuel sources, this being carbohydrates, which is glucose and glycogen. These are basically the energy sources that come from these nutrients, fats, fatty acids. So it constantly switches, your body constantly switches between them based on intensity, availability, and demand. So when your body prefers carbs, carbs are being used primarily with high intensity exercise. This is lifting, weightlifting, strength training, as well as sprinting. This could be anything like HIIT training. This could also be just really, just high intensity exercise in general. If you're doing something that's, really bringing a lot of, effort, that's where carbohydrates are going to play a big role. This also, carbs are also used with quick bursts of energy and also after a high carb meal. Of course, the body is going to use more carbs as well. So when your body burns fat, this is oftentimes happening at rest or low intensity cardio. So this could be during fasting or long duration based workouts. This can also happen overnight as well as during sleep. So keep that in mind that the big point that you want to understand here is that carbs are being used with more higher intensity based movement and activity, whereas fats are more being used the most when your body's at rest and not as active. So, fasted versus fed training. So, which boosts metabolic flexibility? So, understand that fasted training is, of course, training where you're not eating anything before you're training. And then fed training is where you're consuming, a certain, like a meal or a snack before you get started with your workout. That's what we're talking about here when we're talking about these 2 points of fasted versus fed training. So, fasted training, again, keep in mind that fasted training is where you're consuming foods, or excuse me, that's the opposite. Fasted training is where you're not consuming foods during, before your exercise. So, training in a fasted state, this is usually before breakfast, before you're eating anything in the morning, teaches your body to use fat as its primary fuel. So, especially during lower intensity workouts like walking or moderate cardio, that's when fat is being used as the primary source. So this helps with improving fat oxidation, increasing insulin sensitivity, which is a good thing as well, enhancing your body's ability to switch fuel sources more efficiently. When we're talking about fed training, again, this is where you're consuming, food before you're doing training. This is going to help at the same time with performance and muscle support. So, eating before training, especially carbs in conjunction with protein, gives your body quick access to glucose and amino acids. So, these are energy sources, of course, and they're fuel to keep your body going. So, this again supports high intensity performance, preserves that lean muscle mass, improves the recovery and strength output in your workout. So this is of course ideal for strength training as well as HIIT and hypertrophy focused workouts. So when it comes to exercise, it's all dependent on you on how you want to choose it. However, with my exercises, because I focus primarily on hypertrophy in my routine, usually I'll consume a small amount, like a, carb snack or something like that before I get started with my routine, as well as drinking pre-workout. Normally, I don't go completely into my workout fasted. Um, and that's just, my choice. It's not a bad thing if you go into your workout on an empty stomach. It's just you do need to make sure that, you know, you're sort of using the right method. So if you're doing a more lower intensity workout, it's okay that you don't really, consume that much food beforehand or that you're not consuming food at all because you're doing a lighter, activity. Whereas if you're focusing on hypertrophy and strength, it can be beneficial. Again, keep in mind you don't have to eat like a huge meal. That's not what we're talking about here. It's just eating a small amount, again, like I mentioned, like snack, like a carb, like a protein bar or something, in your system before you start training. That's kind of what we're talking about here. It doesn't have to be like a huge, like a huge meal, but, having some kind of nutrients in your body for it to use in your workout, basically. So just know that depending on what you're focusing on and depending on your activity, that's going to determine whether one of the options is better than the other. Again, keep in mind that fed training is more beneficial for somebody focusing on hypertrophy and strength, whereas when we're talking about lower intensity activity and burning fat, that's where fasted training kind of comes in there. So, intermittent fasting and metabolic flexibility. So, the signs or hop when it comes to this. So, you've likely heard of intermittent fasting, and this is basically, a cycle of fasting. It's pretty popular right now. So, the way that intermittent fasting works is that you're basically, having a pattern of eating and then fasting. That's pretty much the simple definition of intermittent fasting itself. So the way that intermittent fasting normally works is there's different types of protocols that people kind of go on. So there's a 16 hours fast and then an 8-hour eating window. There is a 2 low-calorie days per week, as well as a 1 meal a day sort of fasting method. So these are just all the different fasting methods. So the science how intermittent fasting could boost metabolic flexibility. So during a fast, insulin levels drop, allowing fat to be used as fuel. Again, keep in mind a lot of times with fasting, fats are going to be used more. Glycogen stores deplete, promoting fat oxidation. Mitochondrial function improves, enhancing fat burning capacity. And then the long-term effects is improved insulin sensitivity, enhanced endurance and energy use, as well as reduced inflammation. So keep in mind with this point here that this is not for everybody. If you're somebody focusing on strength and hypertrophy, intermittent fasting is not the best option because when you're focusing on muscle gain and hypertrophy, you need the maximum amount of nutrients in your body as much as possible because you're placing your body through so much stress in those workouts. They have to have some form of fuel to build back. So when we're talking about this, this is more geared towards somebody who is wanting to really burn fat and get these specific effects from it. So this is not for everybody. Keep that in mind. I don't really recommend this for somebody who's focusing on hypertrophy or strength, strength gains themselves because your body needs adequate fuel in order to gain muscle. So that's something I want to get across here. But there can be benefits to this method. So zone 2 cardio, your metabolism's secret weapon. So zone 2 is basically a form of cardio training. In this zone is where the body relies primarily on fat as fuel. It's considered low to moderate intensity. You should be able to hold a full conversation. So what this means is there's different zones of cardio. So with this particular zone, this is not like an extremely high intensity sort of cardio. This is a more steady, sort of rhythm cardio where if you're talking to somebody, you can hold a conversation. You're not losing, you're not running out of breath. That's basically what we're talking about with this sort of cardio method is that it's a steady rhythm of cardio that you're doing. So this is typically around 60 to 70% of your max heart rate that is being used in the zone 2 cardio. So this, of course, improves fat metabolism, builds aerobic base and mitochondrial density. It also boosts metabolic flexibility, which again is your body's ability to switch between fat and carbs. It also enhances, of course, cardiovascular efficiency, helping with heart health, and also promoting recovery and stress reduction. So, like I've mentioned with, talking about the topic of, hypertrophy, going back to how you can, combine these two elements. Cardio has a lot of benefits, not only for somebody who's wanting to burn fat, but also for somebody who is focusing on hypertrophy and strength. However, what you need to keep in mind is that when you're focusing on cardio, you do need to have a proper balance between how much cardio you do. And that's something to sort of keep in mind. So a lot of times with my clients who are focusing on hypertrophy, usually they'll have a small bout of cardio that they do in their routine in order to help, focus on that cardiovascular health. We still need to focus on that at the same time as also, improving strength and hypertrophy. Heart health still plays a big role in our routine. So it's important to also include this. So for zone 2 cardio, again, you're seeing a lot of benefits that come with, helping with fat burning, but this is helping with that metabolic flexibility, as we mentioned. So the more that you're doing sort of this steady state sort of cardio, the more it's going to help with your body being able to sort of switch gears on what fuel is being used. So just keep that in mind. So carb cycling and strategic fueling. So, a nutrition strategy that adjusts daily carb intake based on activity level. That's basically what carb cycling is. This is basically alternating between high carb, moderate carb, and low carb days. So, this is designed to fuel performance, promote fat burning, and support metabolic flexibility. So, again, keep in mind that depending on your goals, whether you do this type of method is, all determined based on that. So what to each day? So when we're talking about carb cycling, there's a certain, types of food that you're going to consume with each of these particular days. On high carb days, you're going to focus on sweet potatoes, oats, rice, fruits. You're going to also focus on lean protein at the same time as well as greens. One thing I do want to mention here too is that it's important to still focus on your other macronutrients. Make sure also, alongside your other macronutrients, that you are not just choosing, a bunch of processed carbs. That's not what we're talking about here. We're still talking about leaner options. We're still talking about complex carbs. We're just, having them in a higher, consuming a higher amount of them. That doesn't mean that we just get whatever carbs we want to get. We still need to focus on having quality nutrients in our diet, regardless if we're having a higher carb day, moderate carb day, anything of that nature. So that's what I want to get across here too, is that you still need to make sure that you're getting quality nutrients in your diet. And of course, even, it's okay to get off, when it comes to if you get off from your diet and you're not, you can't, sometimes we kind of get in a, where our rhythm shifts and, we kind of go off our routine and that's okay. But the thing you hear is that you need to focus, of course, on moderation, like with anything else. But I just wanted to mention that as much as possible, you want to focus on quality nutrients when it comes to the carbs that you choose. So, with high carb days, again, sweet potatoes, oats, rice, fruits, as well as lean protein and greens. Lower carb days, you would focus on avocados, nuts, and olive oil. More protein focused meals, as well as non starchy veggies. So, you're kind of seeing a shift here, whereas, in low carb days, you're putting more emphasis on other macronutrients such as your proteins and your fats. And that's sort of the difference there. You still want to have a balance in your other nutrients. You don't want to just focus primarily on carbs themselves. You want to balance them out in a specific way. With moderate carb days, you want to have balanced whole grains, of course, lean meats or fatty fish in your diet. Again, these are healthy fats, lean proteins, as well as mixed veggies and healthy fats. So that's basically what your mix here is on a moderate carb day. So hormones, stress, and sleep. So the hidden pillars of flexibility. So I've discussed in the past a little bit about sleep and a little bit about how stress can sort of affect sort of your metabolism. And I want to sort of touch on that here as well. So metabolic flexibility isn't just about food and exercise. As I've mentioned before, even with your workouts, it's a combination of three major things when it comes to trying to accomplish your goals. And it's, of course, your fitness, your workouts and exercise, as well as your nutrition and your recovery process. Those are the big things you have to really balance out in order to really achieve your goals. And so that's what I want to go over here and talk about is on the more recovery side of things and sleep. So, your internal environment sets the foundation for fat burning, energy, and performance. It's important to make sure that you have a good recovery, rhythm, schedule, and routine. So, insulin, of course, controls blood sugar and fat storage. Balanced insulin is better fuel switching, allows for better fuel switching. If it spikes too often, it reduces fat burning. Cortisol is a stress hormone. Acute stress is helpful. Chronic stress, insulin resistance, belly fat, and cravings. So, cortisol again can increase when if you're not getting enough sleep. This is usually when cortisol starts to sort of increase, as well as stress can make this increase at the same time as well. So, make sure that, you're prioritizing sleep as much as possible. Leptin and ghrelin, hunger and being satiated at the same time. So, poor sleep or stress, of course, is going to equal increased hunger and reduced insatisfaction. So, when you are lacking in both of those two components, that's going to really, of course, make the process of recovery that much more difficult. So, the main thing that I want to mention here is when it comes to sleep, the best thing to do is to create a routine, a sleep routine that you can stick to. You don't need to just go to sleep at random times every night. You need to build a sleep routine in order to help your body get adjusted to that routine. With me, now I'm not saying this is for everybody, but with me, this is going to sound crazy, but I usually go to bed by 8:30 each night. I know not a lot of people do that, but for me, that's sort of my time to go to bed. It's just I've sort of just created that routine. I go to bed at that time, and then I get up at 5 o'clock every morning. That's sort of my sleep routine. And my body's so adjusted that I wouldn't need to really set an alarm, even though I still do. My body's so adjusted that it's on a clock itself. So the more that you build that rhythm, the more it's going to be easier to get the proper amount of sleep. And that's what I'm trying to get across here. Make sure that you have a time to where you're sort of winding down and get ready to go to bed so that you can, get ready for that time of sleep. So that's what I want to mention here is make sure that you really emphasize the recovery side of things, your rest. It's really important, you know, don't stay up late too often. Make sure that you're giving your body, enough sleep and rest, and it makes a difference. You will notice a huge difference when you start to build a good sleep routine and when you're getting a full 7 to 8 hours a night. And I know that it can't happen every night. That's fine. It happens. There's nights where I don't sleep well. But the thing is here is that we're just trying to build that rhythm and that routine. That's the main thing. So just know that when you don't have your recovery in order, it's going to affect that metabolic flexibility as well as, again, sort of increasing that hunger as well as the risk of increasing cortisol and things of that nature. So, how to build a weekly plan to improve metabolic flexibility. So, again, you train your body to efficiently switch between carbs and fats for fuel through a mix of nutrition, training, and recovery, as we just discussed. Again, keep in mind a good way to do this is through high carb days, low carb days, as well as moderate carb days. So again, high carb before and after training, rice, oats, fruit, and lean protein. Low carb days, fats and protein, as well as eggs, avocado, nuts, and greens. Moderate carb days for balanced whole grains and protein, as well as veggies. But keep in mind that we're not just, focusing on nutrition, but also our workouts, having a balance in our workout routine, depending on the activity we choose. Again, when we're focusing on, higher carb, if we're focusing on high intensity, I should say, then we're going to consume a little more higher carb based foods to help fuel that performance in our workouts. Whereas when we're focusing on, you know, lower intensity, fats are being used more. So just keep that in mind between those two nutrients. Alrighty, guys. So I know that there was a lot of different things I discussed as always, but I hope that you found this helpful, insightful, and valuable at the same time. I enjoy talking about these topics. I think they can really help to give you a little bit more thought on what you do in your nutrition and diet, as well as the same time, thinking about your workouts, the intensity you're doing in your workouts, and how that plays a role and takes effect in your overall, nutrition and how your body uses those carbs and fats, as well as recovery. Recovery is a big thing that I really want to expand upon, and I think it's one thing that, you know, alongside nutrition, I think nutrition is another thing that people really kind of fumble a little bit with and kind of struggle with, and that's understandable. Nutrition can be hard to, like, it was always one of my hardest things to really pinpoint. But recovery, again, is that other pillar that you need to really zero in on, and it's something I would like to discuss further, in the future. But with all that being said, guys, that's all I have for you today. Again, I really hope you found this helpful. Feel free to leave a comment. This video will also be uploaded to YouTube, so of course, if you miss it, you can watch it there. You can also check out my previous live streams on my YouTube channel, which I keep updated. Every week, I usually upload a new stream on there for you to view. I am going to be working on a new original video outside of just the live streams and the short form videos where I'll be uploading to YouTube. So watch for that pretty soon. I will be in the process of working on that. Again, guys, I really appreciate you taking the time to really check this out, and feel free to let me know if you have any questions about anything I discussed. Again, check out my website if you want to learn more about online fitness coaching. So thank you guys once again for your time. I really hope that you found this helpful and valuable. And I will see you guys next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time in the next